Okay, so I am going to start the recording for today's session. Okay, so we are starting in on chapter 1 of the textbook, which is dealing with the elements of sound. So the first unit of this textbook talks about kind of the basics of sound. It's sort of an intro to music theory. And it's because we're going to spend the rest of the semester after part 1, so after these first couple of weeks, we'll spend the rest of the semester talking about music history and going through different pieces and composers throughout music history. And we need to know how to describe the music and how to study the music and the terms that we're going to be using to talk about these pieces. So we've got to learn those terms. And that's kind of what we're doing here at first, is going over some of the basics of sound and the elements and learning some of the terminology that goes with studying music. Okay, so today we're actually going to dive a little bit into kind of some basic science stuff with sound, but then we'll also get into some of the terminology. So first off, in the textbook, they talked about sound and how sound is created. So music is a sound, right? Music starts as a sound, and then our brain interprets that as music. So we have to kind of understand how sound works before we get into anything else. So if you will, you can either say out loud or type on our document here, how is sound created? What starts a sound?
Oh, apparently you can't all talk in the same spot.
No.
I'll move it around, that's okay.
That was pretty good.
Okay, so vibrations traveling through the air. So what starts the sound, the airwaves from vibrating? Vibrations is correct. But it all starts with an object itself vibrating. So something is vibrating, and that sends the airwaves into motion, and then that is what makes it into our ear and vibrates our eardrum, and then our eardrum takes that as electrical impulses and sends it into our brain, and our brain figures that out and interprets that so that we can perceive that as a sound, either as spoken word or just noise, or interpreting it as musical sounds. Okay, and the way that your brain interprets musical sounds is completely up to you. Some people believe, some people really like just noise and different kinds of, world sounds and consider that to be music, and that's okay. Some people like more traditional styles of music and things that, have more traditionally been called music. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So sound starts as an object vibrating. So if you're hearing me talking, which hopefully you all are at this point, whether you're actually listening or not, you're at least hearing it. When I start talking, my vocal cords vibrate. That sends the air into motion. Okay, the air comes out of my mouth and travels throughout this room, or goes into the microphone and travels throughout the internet and comes out your speaker. And those waving airwaves then make it into your brain, into your ear, and it vibrates your eardrum. And then your brain is translating those vibrations into words, into a concept that you can understand. I don't know about you guys, but I think that's pretty incredible that our brains are able to do that. And our brains really do some interesting stuff when it comes to sound. Not only can we interpret things as being able, as words and being able to understand what people are saying, we can also hear little things in the voice, in what's being communicated, or the different sounds around us, and our body reacts in certain ways. If I change my tone of voice a certain way, your body might react to it. I don't want to frighten any of you, but if I just suddenly started yelling at you, your brain would interpret that as me being angry and you being in danger, and you would have a reaction to that. For some of you, the reaction would be to back away. For some of you, the automatic reaction would be to become aggressive and to face that fear. But also, if I started to stutter really bad and my speech got slurred, some of you, your brain would automatically interpret that something's wrong and you need to figure out what's going on, because obviously either your brain's not interpreting things correctly or there's something medically going on wrong with me. We also hear certain sounds and we automatically react a certain way. If we were to hear, somebody scream in terror outside, our brains would be alerted and we would know, okay, we need to go see what's going on. Or if we heard a car accident outside, we would automatically be alerted to that and think, oh, we need to react in some way. Okay, and all that stuff happens naturally. So humans are able to interpret sounds in different ways. And our brain also, one of the most amazing things that our brain does is that it's able to tune out certain sounds. It's able to just turn things off and only focus on the importance. And you may not even realize that this is happening. But we're going to kind of test that. So there's 7 of you in class right now. If I stop talking, if I go completely silent, your brain will suddenly become aware of all of the different sounds in this room. Did you guys hear that? Did you notice that? It's almost like the rest of the world gets turned up. Okay, we suddenly can hear the clock ticking. We can hear the fan in the projector. We heard that bus go by. And if I was still talking, you probably wouldn't even notice that. Your brain is just tuning all of that other stuff out. When you're driving, when you're driving down the freeway, it's loud. No matter how fancy your car is, it's loud. Okay, but because you've got the radio on most of the time, or you're focusing on driving, you tune that stuff out. Next time you're going 80 miles an hour down the freeway, turn off the radio and just sit in silence for a minute, and you'll notice how loud everything is. And it's really amazing that our brains just kind of turn that off. It's pretty interesting. Okay, at least I think it's interesting. You guys are probably thinking, what in the world is this dude talking about? So one of the things that our brain does is it interprets sound, and it starts to think about the different aspects of the sound. And music theorists and scientists have come up with some categories of sound, with some ways to express, some ways to describe sound. So your book calls them the 4 categories of sound. I've called them the elements of sound in theory classes before. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on here in chapter 1, is the 4 elements of sound. And what are those? Go ahead and type those in the box, or just tell me out loud. What are the 4 elements of sound?
I'm just gonna set this one out because I've got weed glass on.
Some of you guys are frantically opening the textbook trying to see. I'll give you a hint. They're the names of the different subsections of the textbook in chapter 1.
But I also went through and I read 1 through 10. So
Oh, wow.
I was like, I'm here last night.
Okay, so pitch is one of them. All right, I'm starting to see some of them show up. So good.
This is the only two I could remember.
So pitch, dynamics, tone color, and duration. So the 4 main categories, and I'm just going to kind of add them over here, are pitch, dynamics, tone color, and duration. So those are the 4 categories of sound, and everything else fits into those bubbles. So rhythm has to do with duration. Of course, sound is not a category of sound because sound is sound. And everything else will kind of fit in there. And I'm going to talk about each of these today, and we're going to kind of explain what each of these is and how we figure this out as it relates to music. Good. So we'll start with pitch. So first off, before we talk about what determines the pitch of sound, what is pitch? What is that telling us? When we talk about the pitch of a sound, what are we talking about? That's how we determine it. Yes, that's good. But what is the frequency telling us? Perfect. Pitch is the relative highness or lowness of the sound. And Trinity, what is it that determines the pitch? And it is determined by the frequency of the sound. So it's determined by the frequency of the sound, and it's actually determined by the frequency of the vibration. So when we talk about the frequency of the vibration, we're talking about how fast or slow those sound waves are vibrating, how fast or slow that sound, that object is vibrating. That determines the pitch. Okay? And I'll add of vibration. So if something is vibrating fast, is that going to be high or low? High. If something is vibrating slow, is that going to be high or low? So fast vibrations are a high pitch, slow vibrations are a low pitch. Good. And we measure that, Skylar, that would be either the modern era or the 21st century. And we measure that by the frequency. And usually that's also determined by the size of the object. Smaller objects are going to vibrate faster. Larger objects are going to vibrate slower. Okay? So, for instance, if you look at a cymbal, a drum cymbal, if you have a little tiny, like 4-inch diameter cymbal, it's going to be a really high-pitched crash. Whereas if you have a giant gong, it's going to be a really low-pitched crash. Okay? Just like wind chimes. If you've ever looked at wind chimes or listened to wind chimes, the size of the little tube is what determines the pitch. Okay? Because the little ones are vibrating really fast, so they're going to be really high pitched, where the big ones are vibrating really slow, and they're going to be lower pitched. Okay? Same thing with a pipe organ. If you've ever looked at a pipe organ, you'll notice that all the different pipes are different sizes. Okay? The smaller pipes vibrate the air much faster, so that's going to be the higher notes. The larger pipes vibrate much slower, so that's going to be the lower notes. Okay? Now, once a pitch has a defined frequency that we can analyze, we call it a tone. So a tone is a sound with definite pitch. So it has a frequency that we can zoom in on, zero in on, and be able to say, yes, that is a tone. So for modern music, by that I mean music from the last like 2,000 years. I know that seems modern, right? In what we call Western music. You'll hear me talk about Western music a lot. When I say Western music, I mean music that originated in Europe or the Western Hemisphere, in Americas. Okay, so that's primarily what we're going to talk about. African music has some different properties. Asian music has some different properties. So we're primarily looking at Europe and Americas, because the music that you listen to on a regular basis, that's kind of where it originated. Okay, so in Western music, we have a standard frequency that is the basis of our music. Does anybody know what that frequency is? The note is A. That's the note that starts our musical alphabet, the letter A. And the basis for the note A4 is 440 hertz. So A4 is 440 hertz, very good, Layla, which translates into cycles per second. So that's how we measure the frequency, in cycles per second, or hertz, which we abbreviate Hz. And just music that's measured in hertz. Anything that has a frequency is going to be measured in cycles per second, how fast that's happening every second. Your blinker in your car, which some of you may have never turned on. Your blinker in your car measures in cycles per second. You can actually look at the speed of that blinker and measure that against a clock and figure out what the cycles per second are. Okay, maybe. You might have to do some math to make it work. Okay, the screen, this projector is refreshing at a certain frequency, at a certain number of cycles per second. If you bought a TV in the last 10 years or so, there's always a refresh rate on the TV that's measured in hertz. You know, it might be 120 hertz or 240 hertz or up from there. Okay, nicer TVs have higher refresh rates that makes everything that's moving fast on the TV look a lot smoother. Okay, your cell phone screen has a refresh rate. If you have just kind of an average middle level cell phone, like an iPhone, 9, or I guess there wasn't a 9, like an iPhone 8 or below, or just kind of a mid-tier Android phone, it probably refreshes at 60 hertz. That was the standard for a long time. These days, nicer cell phones, the newer and more expensive cell phones, go up to 90 hertz or 120 hertz that they refresh at. And that just makes it look smoother. When you're scrolling through Facebook, that scroll animation is going to be a lot smoother on something with a higher refresh rate. Okay, if you've ever gone from an iPhone to an iPad, you may notice that everything looks smoother on the iPad, and that's because the iPad has a higher refresh rate. Okay, so sound waves have that frequency. We measure that frequency, and that gives us the tone. So 440 hertz is the basis of modern music. Most instruments in the world are built off of that standard frequency as the basis. All of your guitars, all of your pianos, everything is centered around that frequency. And we determined the frequency, or at least a relative frequency, of every note based around a division of A440. Okay, so A440 sounds like this. So that's 440 cycles per second. Middle C, which is the middle C on the piano, if you walk up to a piano and you find the note C that's in the middle, that's middle C, and that's C4. That is 261.6 hertz, or cycles per second. Okay? If it has an irregular vibration, if it's not a frequency that we can hone in on, we say that it is an indefinite pitch, like a cymbal. If I hit on a drum set, you can't really focus in on a note there. Okay? It's not a definite pitch, it's not a definite frequency. Okay? So what does that look like? Well, I'll show you. I'm going to switch sides here. Bloop, bloop, bloop. And for those of you that are online, so if we were to measure a sound wave using an oscilloscope or a spectrometer or something like that, this is what it would look like. Okay, so the computer interprets that sound wave and makes it look a certain way so that we can analyze it. Okay, so what we're actually looking at is the physical sound wave, is how fast it's vibrating, how fast it's going. All right, and we're going to measure that in cycles per second. And what we're actually counting are the peaks in there. Okay, so let's say that this line on top is 1 second long. It's 1 second long. How many peaks do you see in this line? 3. So this line would vibrate, this sound wave vibrates at 3 cycles per second, or 3 hertz. Now, 3 hertz is way beyond the human range of hearing. We can hear from about 20 hertz to about 20,000 hertz. So we would never be able to hear that sound. Okay, so instead, let's multiply it out to make it actually relative to something we can hear. So let's say that instead of being 1 second long, this line is 1/100th of a second long. 1/100th of a second long. There's 3 peaks there, so it would be 300 hertz, or 300 cycles per second. That is approximately there. I think that's actually like 311 or something like that, but it's close enough. So 300 cycles per second. All right? This bottom one is the same length of time, so 1/100th of a second, and how many peaks do you see on the bottom? I'm sorry?
6.
6. So we have 6 peaks on the bottom, so that's going to be how many hertz? 600 hertz. Yeah. So you have 300 hertz and you have 600 hertz. Which one is going to be a higher pitch? 600 hertz. Good. It's vibrating twice as fast. Okay? So if this is 300 hertz, this is 600 hertz. Now you might notice that those sound really good together. It just blends into each other. And if you were looking at a keyboard and knew anything about music already, you might recognize that those are the same letter name. So on the keyboard, 300 hertz is D4, 600 hertz approximately is D5. So they're the same letter. They're both the note D. And the reason we say that is because they are moving, they are an octave apart. So if you double or halve the frequency, it moves by what we call an octave. And an octave is an interval, which is the distance between two tones. Any two notes have an interval of some kind. Now, if we were in an advanced music theory class, I would make you memorize all of the different intervals, but you don't have to do that. Okay? But if I play any two notes on the keyboard, they are going to have an interval. Okay? Starting here, if I play the same note twice, we call that a unison. The smallest interval in Western music is a half step. Sounds like that. Any two notes that are adjacent on the keyboard are a half step apart. That's the smallest interval you can get. Okay? And then we go up from there. Half step, whole step, minor third, major third, perfect fourth, augmented fourth, perfect fifth, minor sixth, major sixth, minor seven, major seven, and then we get the octave. Okay? And we actually can number the half steps if we want to. So 1 half step, 2, 3, 4.
Are you doing white keys or are you doing
All of them,
the
white and black.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So to get all of the pitches, you have to include both of them. Okay? So you don't have to worry about most of that. I just kind of wanted you to hear what it sounds like. But what is interesting is that if we play an octave, it sounds good together. Those two frequencies line up very well. Now, you may have watched an animation when you were a kid where Bugs Bunny drew a string and he plucked the string and he talked about the vibrations of that, and then he cut the string in half and he plucked it, and it was each side was exactly twice the vibration. That's the same concept here. Okay? It's vibrating twice as fast. It's exactly half the length. So that happens on a guitar. The 12th fret of a guitar is exactly an octave up. So if you push the 12th fret down, you've gone up an octave. The string is vibrating twice as fast. Okay? So if A40 is A4, which is right there, if I want to figure out what the frequency is of A3, what would I do? Cut it in half. So what's the frequency of A3? It says it right there. Yeah, it's 220. Right? It cuts it in half. Well, let's keep going. That's not on the screen. So A3 to A2, what's the frequency of A2? 110. What's the frequency of A1? 55. Good. All right, now we'll really challenge you here. What's the frequency of A0? 27 and a half. Very good. Okay, so the lowest A on the piano, which we call A0, is 27.5 hertz. And that's pretty close to the lowest note that we can hear as humans. Okay? Now, if I go the other way, it goes up by half, or by twice. It doubles. So A4 is 440, A5 is 880, and so on. Okay? So the octave is always a doubling, and they sound really good together. There are also other intervals that sound really good together, right? So the octave here sounds great. If I go almost the middle of that to what we call a perfect fifth, those sound really good together. right? You can play a perfect fifth between any notes, and they blend really well together, okay? If I go down a third, those sound good together, right? And if I add that fifth on top, well, now it starts to sound like music. We're playing chords, okay? And then other intervals sound more dissonant to our ears. So if we start to go more towards the dissonant sounds, a minor third still sounds pretty good, but it starts to have that kind of sad quality. A sixth sounds okay, but it still sounds kind of sad. A minor sixth is a pretty sad interval. It's one of my favorite intervals in music. Very sad. I love it. One of the most dissonant intervals is 7 half steps, which we call a tritone. That interval was so bad that in the medieval era and the Renaissance era, they believed that interval to be satanic. They believed it was the work of the devil. Part of that is because it was 6 half steps. So the number 6 we know is kind of a devilish number. So anytime in a play or something, if they were making music, if you heard that half step, it usually represented evil or the devil. If I play 2 notes a whole step apart, that's pretty dissonant. It doesn't sound good. We want it to separate. And then if I go even smaller, that sounds really gross, right? We're just not comfortable with that interval. Okay? And it has to do with how the frequencies are blending together and all that stuff. We don't have to get too much into that. Okay. Now, another term that I would like us to know, and I'm going to switch back over to sharing the file. Is pitch range. No, we're in the twilights. So the term pitch range, if you read the chapter, what does the term pitch range tell us? What am I doing? This thing has lost its mind. It's not a perfect system. So what is pitch range?
Isn't it just like where an instrument or a vocal could reach to?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. So the pitch range is the distance between the lowest and highest notes that an instrument can play or a voice can play. The distance, I should have just copied this from the other slide, between the lowest, you guys are going to see my wonderful typing skills here, lowest and highest tones that a voice or instrument can produce. Oh no, and all that went away. Okay, well, you got the idea there. So the distance between the lowest and highest tones that a voice or instrument can produce. Here, I'll just do this. We'll cheat. I'm still getting used to using this system, if you can't tell. Boom. All right. There we go. So that is the pitch range. So the lowest to the highest note that an instrument or a voice can produce. So a flute, all right, if you play flute in the band, your flute, the lowest note that you play on most flutes is a C, is C4. Some flutes have an extra B key, but we're not going to talk about that. Okay, C4 up to about, most professionals can play up to C4, C5, C6, up to C7. Okay, so that's the pitch range from C4 to C7, which is a 3-octave range. Or the frequencies, 261.6 hertz up to about 2000 hertz. Side note, whenever we reach 1000 hertz, we switch over to kilohertz, KHS, or kilohertz. Okay, so if you see 2 kilohertz, that's 2,000 hertz. Okay, my vocal range as a singer, which I'm not a great singer, but my lowest note is D2 on most days. I've been able recently to get down to C, but it starts to sound like a monk at that point. Okay, and then my highest note is about F4. Okay, that's about the highest that I can comfortably go. Sometimes I can go higher, but I don't like to. So, do, re, mi, fa. That's about the most comfortable I can get. I can sometimes get up to a G. So, but as you can see, it doesn't sound very good. And I'm really stretching to get up there. So I don't do that. So I say that my range is from about D2 to F4, which is about 2.5 octaves. And that's pretty normal for somebody like me that's just kind of a casual singer, right? As a professional musician, I'm an instrumentalist. I'm a guitar player, a bass player, drummer, all that stuff. But as a singer, I just kind of have an average range. My wife is a trained singer. She was an all-state vocalist in high school, and she was a music major as a vocalist for a few years before switching, and has been singing professionally since then. And she has about a 3.5 octave range. So she can reach about an octave beyond what I can. Do you guys know who Brendon Urie is? He's the lead singer for Panic at the Disco. Brendon Urie is considered to be one of the greatest rock singers out there today, one of the greatest living rock singers. Brendon Urie's range is enormous. He can sing from the lowest note that I can, the D2, all the way up to the highest note that the flute could play. From D2 to C7, he has about a 5 octave range. That's insane. Now, I always get this question when I'm talking about vocal ranges, and that's, what is falsetto? What does that mean? So everybody, men and women alike, have what is called your head voice or your falsetto range. There's a break in your voice where you flip up into the higher range. Everybody can do it, whether you're trained or not. But what that means is that at a certain point, we have to cross over to where we're sort of faking the tones that are coming out. So when I start to go up high, if I was going to sing a C major scale from here, so I've got do, do, re, mi, fa. Once I get about there, so, la, ti, do. So I can switch over to that falsetto range and go up a little bit higher. I don't use it very often, obviously. It doesn't sound great, but that's what the falsetto range means, and everybody does that. Females, sopranos that sing really, really high are singing in their head voice. They've just trained that to have a very thick, warm tone. Okay, and Brendon Urie is one of those, that he can sing way up in that falsetto range, and it still has a really good tone. Most pop male singers use that falsetto range. I watched a video the other day that was about the falsetto range and being in the top 40 on the charts, and like for the last 10 years, something like 70% of the top 40 songs featured males singing in a falsetto range. Justin Bieber sings in falsetto range almost all the time. Bruno Mars, of course, in the 80s it was all over the place. All of those 80s hair singers, Guns N' Roses, Axl Rose, and all those guys used that falsetto range all the time. Okay. All right. So that is probably more than you ever wanted to know about pitch, but that's kind of the basic part of pitch. So now we're going to switch over to the next one, and we're not going to spend quite as much time on each of the next categories of sound.
My computer's getting low on battery, and I do not have a cord.
Okay, you can just shut it down. It's fine. It's not a big deal. I don't want you to lose your battery there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about dynamics. So when we talk about dynamics in sound, what are we talking about? What are the dynamics? You can type it on here, or you can put it in the chat, or just say it out loud, whatever.
Degrees of loudness or softness.
There you go. Ladies and gentlemen, Trista can read. Dynamics are the degrees of the degrees of loudness or softness. Now, important to note that this is relative. So it is the relative loudness or softness of a sound. It's the relative loudness or softness of a sound. And this relates to the amplitude. So remember that sound wave that we looked at earlier? Okay, so we have a sound wave that looks like this. The distance from here to here tells us the pitch. That tells us the frequency. Okay, the amplitude, or the distance from here to here, is what tells us the dynamics, the loudness. Okay, it's how much that air is vibrating, the width of the sound wave. So that is called the amplitude, which tells us how loud it is. And we measure amplitude in decibels, or dB. Okay? And it's lowercase d, capital B, by the way, when you see decibels. And it's because they're named after Alexander Graham Bell. See, apparently I keep hitting the wrong button. Decibel, dB. And I really hope I'm spelling decibel right. I'm not 100% sure there. Okay, so decibels just tells you how loud or soft it is. Okay, and there's a whole chart you can look at of, like, you know, what is so loud that it's, I think 120 decibels is actually causing you physical harm. So if you listen to your music really loud in the car, or if you go to a rock concert, most rock concerts these days are about 130, 140 decibels. And you're actually damaging your ears at that point. Not that it stops me. I'm not up here telling you to stop doing that, but you are. If you listen to headphones and you listen to them super loud, it's the same thing. It's damaging your ears at that point. Okay. All right, and about a 160 decibels is where you start, like, you experience that as pain at that point. If I played something at 160 decibels, it would hurt you, like, bad enough that you would. It's not just, ow, that's loud. It's like causes you physical pain. Okay, so we have, in dynamics, we use some Italian words as the terms for dynamics. So what are some of those terms? You can type them into the chat box there, or onto the document. What are some of the terms we use for dynamics? Pretty sure there's a chart of them in the textbook. So the English terms that we would use to describe how loud or soft something is, while you're typing that stuff, are what? What are the English terms that you would use?
I don't know what language these come from, but I know that what I've always heard is forte is loud, piano is soft, and then mezzo means medium, so mezzo forte is medium loud, mezzo forte is medium soft.
That's exactly right. That's 100% correct. Okay, and some of you guys are typing it now and doing a good job. So piano is soft. Forte means loud. And then anything with mezzo is going to be in the middle. So mezzo piano is like slightly soft. Mezzo forte is slightly loud. Okay, good. Somebody said in the chat, fortissimo is very loud. Pianissimo is very soft. Okay, and those are kind of the basic ones that you really need to know that we're going to use regularly in this class. Okay, so you can think about it as, you know, the degrees of turning up and down the volume on your radio. Pianissimo is soft, is about as soft as you can comfortably play. Okay, and the shorthand of that, by the way, is 2 P's. PP. He said PP. Piano is symbolized as a P, and that means soft. So piano is Italian for soft. Forte is Italian for loud, and we use an F. Fortissimo, we use two Fs. And then for mezzo, we add an M in front of it. So MP or MF. And then you can keep going in the extreme ranges from there. So if there were 3 Ps, that would be even softer. 4 Ps, 5 Ps, that's just ridiculously soft. And the same thing if you go the other direction. Okay, 3, 4, 5 Fs, that's going to be just extremely loud. Okay, and we really didn't start to see those show up until about the late 19th century, early 20th century is when people started using those dynamics more. Okay. Sometimes in music, we do what is called an accent. And that just means that we're going to emphasize a note. So if I were to accent a note, I'm just going to put a little bit of emphasis on it. So let's say I'm playing these 5 notes. If I accent the first note and the highest note, you notice that those are a little bit higher. And it's those accents that kind of give us a sense of rhythm in there. So if I'm just playing, that just sounds like straight ahead notes. But if I put accents in there, we can start to feel a rhythm. So those accents are the emphasis on the note. And that tells us the important notes. We accent our speech naturally without even thinking about it. If you were going to ask your friend, what are we having for lunch today? So if I say, Jamie, what are you having for lunch today? What word did I accent? Lunch. That's the important word in the sentence. Does that make sense? And we do that naturally without even thinking about it. It just happens. Okay? I used to go into more detail about that, and I found that my students got really paranoid as they were talking. They would start thinking about what words they were accenting, and it's really interesting to kind of look at that. Okay, if we want to gradually get louder in music, what's the term for that? Crescendo. Good. And a crescendo, with my excellent mouse drawing skills, looks like that, kind of. So that is a crescendo, which means we're going to gradually get louder. And the way to think about this musically, when you see it on the page, is that the music on this side is going to be softer than the music on this side. So it's kind of like your greater than and less than symbols in math. Okay? So the music on the left side of the crescendo is softer than the music on the right side of the crescendo. It's gradually getting louder. The opposite of that, if we go the other way, is called what? So there's 2 terms. One of them that we hear often is decrescendo, but that is technically, I'm going to be dramatic here, that is technically incorrect. Now, in the 21st century, we use it colloquially, so is it really technically incorrect? Whatever, who cares? Okay, so decrescendo, but the actual Italian term for getting softer is diminuendo.
Yeah, I actually knew both of them. And I still remember Einstein saying diminuendo from when I watched preschool shows.
There you
Yeah.
go. So decrescendo, diminuendo, they mean the same thing. They're both the opposite of a crescendo. It's to gradually get softer. And again, the music on this side is louder than the music on that side. These are the important terms that you need to know when it comes to dynamic. Okay? Piano, forte, mezzo, knowing that that's in between. Fortissimo, pianissimo, that just means extra. Issimo just means more, basically. Yes? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This room is full of outlets, by the way. If you ever need to charge your phone or your computer or whatever, you are welcome to. Good. Decrescendo, crescendo, those are terms that we're going to use pretty regularly when we talk about dynamics. Okay? Now, lastly, I want to talk about tone color. Tone color can be a little bit weird, a little bit of an abstract concept. Okay? So tone color or timbre, T-I-M-B-R-E, means timbre, or is pronounced timbre. And tone color or timbre is the quality that identifies an instrument's sound. An easier way to think of it, I think, is how we describe the sound. It's the adjectives we use to describe the sound. Okay, so when you think tone color, we're not talking specifically about color. We're not talking about blue, black, orange, green, whatever. We're talking about adjectives. And Skylar put in the chat like dark or moody. And that's exactly right. Okay, it's the tone color or the timbre that tells you the difference between a clarinet and a flute whenever you hear it. Now, that's a bad example because some of you probably can't tell the difference between a clarinet and a flute just by hearing it. Okay, but it is the difference between, say, an electric guitar and a piano. Those sound very different, and it's the timbre or the tone color that tells you that. Okay, so this keyboard has several different sounds on it, and it's the tone color or timbre that's going to identify them. I'm going to play the exact same thing using a few different sounds, and you can tell me, you can go ahead and use these sounds as an example to list some adjectives there for how this sounds. So starting with just my piano sound, what is an adjective you would use to describe that sound? Compared to, we'll do this. What does that say? Bright, that's a good one. As opposed to the exact same chord using this sound. What's the difference?
That one sounds like a wedding.
Sounds like a wedding. It's kind of got an organ sound. It's an electric piano sound. That's close enough. But as far as adjectives, if the piano was bright, then this electric keyboard is what?
Soft.
Soft or dim or darker. Okay? So that's how we describe the tone using different terms like that. Okay? Same chord. How would you describe that?
Hopeful.
Dramatic.
Dramatic, okay?
Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Sounds like Catholic Church. I could really go into
Opera.
Yep.
Yeah, it sounds like church or opera.
we'll get into some Bach later on. Okay. So some of those different adjectives that you might use are things like bright, dark, mellow, harsh, smooth. What else?
Warm.
Warm.
I said dramatic earlier.
Dramatic is a good one. What would be the opposite of warm? Cold.
What about if something was just kind of like the same tone the whole time, like kind of like boring? Like what would you use for that?
That's not really quite what we're getting at here. So that would be more like how we describe the actual music. This is more talking about the quality of the sound, the quality of the instrument. If I play, I don't play my trumpet very often, but if I were to play some notes on this, how would you describe that tone? Bad. Like you hadn't practiced in 2 years.
That kind of hurt.
It kind of hurts, painful. Hey, patriotic. Good. So it's kind of a brighter, harsher tone. Whereas if I were to mellow that out a little bit, See how well I can do that. That changes the tone a little bit, and that gets what Skylar says depressing if I go into that version of it. Okay, so it's depressing how bad of a trumpet player I am. I think that's really what she's referring to there. Good. So I could get into the science of why it all sound different, but I'm not going to. It's the tone color that makes them sound different. So I'm going to ask you in some assignments to describe the tone color of a certain sound, of a certain instruments. Okay, I'm not looking for actual colors. I'm not looking for green, blue, red, orange. I'm looking for adjectives. How do you describe that sound? Okay, and that may be a little bit hard. Okay, that's not something you've probably ever had to do before, but that's okay. It's good for you. It's a challenge. Okay, what time does this class go to? Is it 40?
40, I think.
Okay, good. We got 10 minutes. Perfect. Perfecto. Okay. Duration, we don't really talk about in the textbook. What is the duration of something?
How long?
How long it is. That's all the duration is. That's why we don't really talk about it, because it's that simple. Duration, how long it is. Now, when we talk about rhythm here in a little bit, we'll talk about duration more. Okay, that's how we kind of organize the duration, but that's okay. Okay, good. What I would like to do now in our last 10 minutes is I would like us to look at the listening outlines and the listening assignments that we're going to do for this class. So if you've still got your computer pulled up, you can go ahead and get out of the Collaborate session if you're here in class, but I want you to open up the first listening assignment that you have to do. If you've already done it, you're a step ahead, so good job, congratulations. But I want to kind of talk you through this a little bit.
And I'll just pay attention.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so I'm going to share that screen. Okay, so the listening assignments, just to remind you, you go under course materials, under part 1, and you scroll down towards the bottom, and this is where the listening assignments are. So if you click on this listening assignment, it's going to open up, hopefully, in Microsoft Word. Now, while that's opening up, I'm going to actually pull up the textbook. So I don't have, you guys don't have access to this digital textbook. It's only my web students that do. So this is what, if you had bought that code that was like $130, then that is what it would have given you access to, but you don't necessarily need it. But what I like to do is be able to pull it up and look at these different listening outlines. So in your textbook, you have some listening outlines. They look like this. So for the Firebird, in your textbook, on page 8, you have a listening outline for this piece of music. Okay? And on the listening assignment, I gave you a link to listen to, and I understand for some people the link wasn't working, so I actually sent out a message in the announcements with a link to use instead. So make sure you have checked those announcements, and I'm going to pull that up now. So we're going to listen to the Firebird Suite, and we're going to answer some questions about it. So I recommend first that you read through the questions so you know what you're listening for. Okay, what are the instruments? What is the overall shape of the dynamics? What instrument provides the melody at 1 minute and 5 seconds? What instrument family takes over the melody at 1 minute and 40 seconds? What is the overall characteristic of this piece? Most of that stuff is answered right here. This paragraph right here. The second scene begins softly but increasingly grand as the music gradually grows louder. or a crescendo. So what's the overall shape of the dynamics? That. It's a crescendo. It's a gradual crescendo. The instruments are listed right here in the book on page 8. And even has a breakdown of what's happening with the melody. So 1 minute and 5 seconds or 1 minute and 3 seconds in this version of it, 1 minute and 40 seconds, it tells you what's going on right there. So let's listen and follow along in that guideline. So we got a slow melody, the melody in the French horn at piano. And the violins are going to take over the melody here. Flutes are going to join them. And we're going to get a gradual crescendo as more instruments enter. So now we're here in part D. So what instruments have the melody here? So we made it to part D. What instruments have the melody? Violins and flutes. So what instrument provides the melody at 1 minute and 5 seconds? Violins and flute. It's right there.
Pretty much just like listen to that while looking over that outline in the book and answer the questions.
Exactly right. So 117, we're getting bigger. The full orchestra's here, even louder. This sudden drop. It's going to crescendo, and this is who takes over at 140. It's going to drop off. And it's going to crescendo up to our loud close. Okay, so you've got a list of the instruments. What's the overall shape? A crescendo, a gradual crescendo. We talked about the violins and strings, the violins and flutes taking over the melody at 105, the brass taking over the melody at 140, and then the overall characteristic of this piece, that's how it sounds to you. How would you describe this to somebody that's never listened to it before? Okay, so as you do these listening assignments, pull up those outlines in the textbook. That's going to have all the information you need. Okay? All right, that is what I got for you today. Looks like I got a question in the chat. If you have any questions, I'll be around for a minute to ask.
So these recorded lectures can be found on Blackboard, right?
Yes, I'll get it posted. I'm going to go to my office and post it right now.
Also,